can I steal a moment of your time before this episode plays? Thanks so much for listening to Labours of Sports Coaching. The appetite I see for the blend of academic and practical coaching conversations happening on the show is nothing short of amazing, and I'm determined to make this show bigger and better. Now, to help with that mission, please can I ask that you follow and rate the show 5 stars wherever you're listening. This takes maybe 10 seconds and has a massive effect on increasing the show's visibility, and as a result of that, its potential for future growth, which ultimately will enhance your return as a committed listener. Also check out the show support links for anyone looking to offer that extra bit of backing. There's much more to come for Labours of Sports Coaching, and I thank you for joining and driving our new community. And with that, enjoy this episode. Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Labours of Sports Coaching with me, Mark Carroll. Today I'm delighted to be joined by David Baird. David is the creator of Soccer Scoreboards. First, David, how are you? It's great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm good, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm actually, I know we're just speaking there off air, but I've been really looking forward to this. It's quite a practical topic that we're going to get into today in terms of, you know, a sort of pedagogical approach or a sort of view of how you can set up practices to get the most out of them. And actually I was toying with, is this around the technical aspect, is this around the you know, is this a skill act type thing? But it's actually maybe all those things but a bit more, because there seems to be a big onus on fun, and we're going to get to what, you know, the soccer scoreboard is eventually. But I think for the guys listening and the girls listening, it'd be really helpful for us to just kind of speak through that sort of philosophy of thought around fun. I think it's a topic that probably doesn't get delved into enough. It's one of those assuming ones. But I think there's some stuff in there, and when I look at your model and as we build up towards speaking about that, there's some nice things that we can touch on there, and maybe some things that make us think twice actually about what we do and what we care about, what we prioritise. So in a very round the house way of getting to that, maybe let's start off. Tell us a little bit about, David, if you don't mind, just your kind of coaching journey to date, and sort of how did you arrive at your sort of beliefs on what we might call positive coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you've mentioned there around how we maybe don't dive deep enough into fun and what it means. Can't wait to kind of come on to that, because I think most coaches, particularly working with the youngest age groups, you know, you say hands up if you think having fun is important, and you know all the hands will go up from the volunteer coaches when you say, right, keep your hand up if you've mindfully sat down with a cup of tea and thought about what fun looks like for a kid in 2024. You know, all the hands go down, because the definition of fun in this environment is very different to what fun was like perhaps when we were younger. So yeah, thanks for having me on, and I can't wait to kind of get into all of that. It's a real passion of mine. And yeah, it stems from, probably my journey. So I absolutely loved kind of street football and street play and playing Kirby and, you know, free play with my mates and playing tag and like creating games and having fun. And then my experience was maybe the opposite when I went to organised football when I was younger. I think a lot of that fun kind of got, you know, sucked out. So a big part of my motivations is around trying to give particularly young children, young players, maybe a more positive experience than I had at kind of organised sports. But yeah, when I first started coaching, I think you only kind of know what you're exposed to. So I was probably quite directive and probably quite linear with some of my drills and not so much games based. But in regards to my journey, my eyes were really opened. I'll name drop here quite early. When I was doing my degree at the University of the West of Scotland, I got a part-time job in a place called Kevin Keegan's Soccer Circus. I'm not sure if you remember it, Mark. It was out in kind of Renfrew.
Aye, something rings a bell about that. It's amazing.
So I got a part-time job in there, and it was in there. Kevin was there quite often himself. Like, my eyes were really opened. The idea of Soccer Circus, as the name suggests, was like playing football and developing your skills, but really, really fun. So the children wouldn't really notice it. The children that came in, we ran birthday parties, we ran skill sessions, and we're just open to the public for kids to come in and have a fun football experience. And from a young age, a young impressionable age, I seen just like, red faces and sweat dripping off them, but huge smiles on their face, like working insanely hard because like they were having fun, and the coaches were all, I was coach educated to be positive and catch children doing good, and all of that is stemmed probably throughout my whole kind of coaching journey, and some of the things that we can come on to within this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that's kind of stood out to me already. I mean, you speak about the idea of maybe a generational view on fun, and I don't know if that sort of goes part and parcel with what you also mentioned around you're sort of only really as conscious about fun as to how you were exposed to it perhaps as a player. Then we often learn how to coach often from when we played, and then we go through that sort of apprenticeship of learning, and then that indeed maybe gives us a bit of a compass towards whatever our behaviours are as coaches. And again, do we actually think about the influences on our behaviours? Could we maybe speak a little bit to that then? Because what is the more, if it's a dominant or maybe it's a dying out view on fun, but that generational impact, what would you say to that? If you could maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously, I can't tarnish all coaches with the one brush. There are some coaches that, and I've experienced some coaches fairly recently within conversations that they actually aren't just that big on fun. They think players are there to learn, and and in my day it was all about this, and I've had to say the phrase to some coaches fairly recently around like connection before correction. If you're not making it fun for them and you're not building a rapport, and I kind of got challenged with more of a fixed mindset kind of coach. I was like, no, football's all about this, that, and other thing, and I worry you're maybe going to lose those children to the game. But
Mhm.
yeah, a generational thing around fun, and I speak of this at length when I'm doing some of my coach education and things, as I kind of define fun as the fancy word is autonomy, right? But like people want to do what they want to do. There's not many situations in like the whole world that the best thing ever would be if you came in somewhere and somebody said, "Do what you want." You can do what you want. So if you're told you can do what you want, then all of a sudden you're gonna do something that you enjoy. The experience is gonna line up with what you determine to be fun. Again, that generational thing I speak about is, autonomy within society has really changed throughout the past maybe 10 or 15 years. So when I was younger, there wasn't much autonomy inside the house. So there was
Mm.
like 4 or 5 channels on the TV and somebody else chose what was on them. There was Mario and Luigi on the screen going left to right, and all they could really do was jump and run. You had maybe 2 buttons. So not a lot of autonomy there. And you couldn't like phone your best friend if one of your parents was on the internet, because you only had that one phone line. So you didn't have the autonomy to phone your best friends whenever you wanted. So
Mhm.
when I was younger, where you could do what you wanted to do as a child was in the street. So what friends am I going to, knock on their door and ask them to come out and play? I'll choose what friends I want to play with. What games are we going to play? What are the rules of the games going to be? What are the goals going to be? The jumpers. How big are the goals going to be? What are the distances? What are the teams going to be? Who's going to pick the teams? Well, we're going to pick the teams. If the games are uneven, who's going to mix up the teams? Well, we're going to mix up the teams. What rules are we going to put in place? And like just so much autonomy. When are we going to take a break and walk over to the shop and buy a bottle of water? Whatever it could be. When are we going to play a tag game? When are we just going to chill out and do whatever we want to do? So much autonomy. And I think when I go back to my example of asking coaches, who's really thought about this, fun, that if we dive a bit deeper, it's almost flipped now. So in the house, social media companies and games consoles, they've really understood autonomy well because it's no longer Mario and Luigi on the screen. It's well, what do you want to name the character? What do you want to design their vehicle or design their clothes or their hairstyle? The games are now multi-directional. Where do you want to go within this world that you've designed? They're throwing it all back. It's no longer here's a TV guide. This is what you have to watch. It's what do you want to watch over like Amazon Prime, Netflix, Disney. they all have search functions, and you can all put in, you know, and if it doesn't have something on there that you want to watch, you have autonomy to create those things. I'm talking about obviously YouTube and TikTok, and so these kind of organizations really seem to understand autonomy, and that's how we're getting people addicted to. There's plenty of people my age addicted to their phone because of the autonomy it brings. If you and I pull out our kind of stream right now on social media, it's probably going to be different, because it's no longer showing us what they think we want to see. It's tapping into our autonomy. So, yeah, that's the kind of things we need to consider, I think, when we're working with children in football, because the worry is if it has flipped and when the children come to football now, there's a lack of autonomy. You have to play two touch. You need to move to that cone. You have to go in that team. You have to pass the mark and then run to Sarah. Whatever it could be. I think that kind of adult-led, instruction-based approach can really make the alternatives like really desirable and really fun for kids. So we have our work cut out as coaches. I think we need to give the children voice, give the children choice, and try and do things that they have autonomy within. And we can come into some practical stuff, but that can be as simple as taking some of the street stuff and putting it into our modern day practice. Hopefully coaches listen to this are quite often starting their sessions or doing full sessions at our games nights where it's like, okay, you pick what team you want to be from the Euros and let's have a little tournament. Everybody plays each other twice, just go and play, and the autonomy is there around, touches, let the kids pick the teams, not being too instructional. Yeah, so as you can tell, Smart, it's something I'm really passionate about because I find they're the most fun sessions when the children have autonomy, not too much instruction.
Yeah, and it's really interesting point. It almost sounds like, do you believe with, and I know there's certain boundaries to this, but it does sound in the sort of story you seem to tell there, David, is that there seems to be sort of increased agency with players that, and actually not even with players, with young people, that perhaps we're now in more competition as coaches for their attention compared to maybe in previous years where, if they went up the road, there wasn't a lot of other alternative entertainment. But if we want to retain players inside of our sessions and inside of our clubs, it sounds like we need to do more that it sort of taps into that agency that they have, and this sort of comes back to your idea around autonomy and to give them choice so that we make it something they want to do, because otherwise if they don't want to do it, they don't need to do it so much. I don't know if there's if we do you see it in that way, or is something slightly different to that, but it's made me think that way. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, no, we can be in competition, but it can also be in kind of collaboration. If we can take the games consoles they enjoy and do things like leveling up and pausing games and setting challenges and referencing the things that they do enjoy, I think they'll come. And I might be getting a little bit old school myself, but I really do believe that if football's done right, it will always get chosen over the alternatives. I think football, there's just something, there is something scientific about, obviously physical health and mental health, and when you're running around, you just feel great, don't you? So I think when we do football right, like when they come out and it is a more games-based approach, they do have autonomy within the games that they're playing. Their voices are heard. I don't think there's a games console in the world that can compete with good football training. And obviously being a father myself and just loads of experience with good and bad coaching practice. If a kid who enjoys football and is subscribed to coming along to football could come out and do a World Cup night where they they pick teams and they play each other once, and there's some built-in like social activity where kids can just be kids around other kids. I think they choose that every day over any of the games consoles in my opinion.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because if you think about it, and I would probably extend this to just sport more widely, that there's so much elation that can come from doing well at sport, or even indeed just being, involved in sport, that there's not just the sort of physical stimulation, there's also the sort of the feel good factors, the reward of doing well, or even the determination and the motivation, and that maybe brings with it the enthusiasm for the activity of trying to do better. All those things mixed together is both a sort of physical, a psychological, but also a social action as well, in terms of that you're then part of a community, and we know as people we need that. I don't think there is a game console that can do that, and it's actually really interesting that you mention this, because I get the feeling we're probably similar in this respect. I've always been an advocate for gamifying
Yep.
aspects of the coaching process. I don't think there is anything more interesting about video games than the fact that you can do something in a video game that is really tough and you continually fail at it, yet kids keep retrying and they
Yep.
keep doing it. And like all the things we want for players in sport in terms of having that mastery focus, it is so naturally, it's implicit within video games, but
Hmm.
it's really not, a natural thing that comes out inside sport. And I don't know, again, is that an artifact of the environment and how the sort of messaging of the environment, but maybe how much the environment is paying attention to the really important aspect, which is always fun. It's always
Hmm.
that stretch of, well, I'm getting a bit of joy here. There's certain things I can do, can't do. I'm exploring my environment,
Hmm.
and actually where there's need for a bit of a hand and there's tips, the coach is there or the instruction manuals there on my Xbox or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, right, I'm getting this joy back. I'm getting better. I'm failing, but I'm doing it. And
Yeah.
there's a real trick to be had there, isn't there? Around
Yeah,
that
and I think
gamification.
that's another lesson for many coaches. For myself included, who's always learning that the games consoles are there to rope people in. And I guess the worry, I'm saying children will always pick football if we get the environment right. The worry of sitting behind a games console within your own environment is that, comfort zone. Because that games console is going to want to keep you on there. Yes, you're going to fail, but it's going to say, oh, but do you know what? You can try again and you have another chance and supportive. So we kind of need coaches to be the same. Like, we're going to play this really fun game tonight. And then when we recognize they're maybe struggling a little bit, it's not berating them or making them feel embarrassed in front of their peers, because then they're just going to go and sit in that comfort zone again. It's saying, that's okay, we'll keep working on it. We'll do it again next week as long as you're having fun. Um, and that's a big element to it, and it is a big part of that games based approach, because there's an element of kind of sink and swim there as well, as long as they feel supported to do so. You've maybe heard the one before. Children compete and adults compare. If you get your environment right, um, if you look through the child's goggles, so often, yes, they're finding it tough, but they're trying their best, and that's what's going to make them better. Yes, it looks messy. Yes, it looks chaotic. It doesn't look as if many of them are getting success. They're all swarming around the ball. But if there's smiles on the face and they're continuing to do it, it's just as you've explained there, the concept of failing but keep coming back, failing but keep coming back. The
Yeah.
thing that we need to be mindful of and we need to be really careful of is that kind of adult mindset that we maybe get when we get a little bit older. We do get a little bit more negative and a little bit more grumpy. And, I feel like anytime my parents come to visit, they're just looking around for what are they going to moan about. That's
Mm,
kind of the mindset. We just need to be mindful of when things are chaotic, children are failing all the time, but keep trying. We're not looking at the session thinking the parents are on the side watching this. I need to tidy this up a wee bit. I need to kind of spread them out and make it a bit easier. There is that big element of sink and swim and embracing that chaotic. And I love that expression. I use it all the time. Children compete and adults compare. It will be often the adult goggles are looking at like, Mark's not doing as well, so I'm going to put him over in this little group, and David's doing quite well, so I'm going to move him up to this group, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to tell him to use his weaker foot, and you can take so much of the fun away and so much of the
mm.
realism away. If children are struggling within the environment, as long as they're having fun, they're probably learning. We don't need to ruin it with the negative adult mindset. Another example I use all the time, Mark, I'll embarrass myself here. When I was younger and the song Tragedy came on the radio and I'm just dancing around and I'm doing the dance moves, right? I'm just having fun as a kid. My dad would walk in and be like, oh, the Bee Gees version's better. Who
Mm,
cares? A kid's just
yeah.
having fun. Adults are quite often looking for that kind of realism and that reality and like pull kids away from the fun they're having. So that's just something we need to watch. We do get a little bit more, our egos can take a hit when we get a little bit older, I think.
Yeah. And seeing some defensive coaches that, 'cause I think that for as many coaches out there, they are purposely acting in a way that I don't think is, as we've kind of spoke to, is always really conducive to growth, enjoyment,
Hmm.
stuff like that. For every, one coach out there, there's probably 4 or 5 that are quite well intentioned,
Yeah.
quite well intended, but maybe it's their view of the role of the coach that creates the problems. Because we're talking a little bit, this sounds like almost like a cultural thing where I
Hmm.
think there's often a very deficit view of coaching, that
Yeah.
coaching, in order to coach, you have to fix things, and therefore the coaching process is led around correction. Now imagine, and this is this starts to come towards certainly your framework, but also sort of other frameworks that have tried to locate fun at the heart of them. Imagine, instead of looking at things in a deficit view and seeing things about as a way of correcting, it's more about encouragement, and it's more about
Yeah.
support, and it's more about the outcome is about the sense of competence rather than the building of competence. And I know sometimes we want both things, but
Yeah.
when the building competence is the salient factor at all costs, you can very easily disrupt the sense of competence that a player can feel, and it's probably underutilizing a very potent part of someone's motivation to continue to do something, to continue to work hard. I don't know what you feel about that, because this is what I wonder around coaching: is the messaging wrong? Because there's good people who are sometimes not doing the wrong thing because they're intentionally doing it, but because they see that as coaching, and it's
Yeah.
what coaching looks like.
Yeah, and I think we're getting a lot better, around those messages of like coaching. It's not really about giving solutions, it's more about giving problems, because the ownership of solving those problems and the enlightenment that brings, that gives you real ownership of the learning. It's about creating problems. And I often use the example of, teachers when we go to school. They
Mm,
know that problem solving is how a lot of children learn. Like they won't say 50 take away 10 is 40. Let's move on to the next one. That's not fun. It's not engaging. And the answer comes too easy, so you'll forget it. Like you really need to work for things that um, you're going to cherish. So they'll obviously turn it into a game. If Mark has 50 pence and he spends 10 pence on a chocolate bar, how much has he got left? So it's about creating problems, not giving solutions.
mm,
Now the teacher knows the answer. But why are they asking the question? Because they know the children need to move around the plastic coins, they need to engage their brain, and they need to have ownership of that learning. So I do think we're getting better on the importance of giving problems as opposed to always giving solutions. And of course,
mm,
this comes down to context and the different age and stage and the level that you're training at. You really need to meet the children like where they are in the journey, because there is a place for more kind of direct led instruction and things that are going to help people to perform in football if that's the level that they're at. The first battle, and in my mind, always kind of goes to the younger children because that's where I do so much of my work. The first battle that I think we need to fight is just developing that really strong love for sport and for football and for the environment and for coming along. And so much of that is achieved through autonomy, play, and
mm,
fun. And when we keep them coming back, then over the years we can get a little bit more coach led. Then over the years we can throw in some challenge and build resilience and skill development and skill acquisition and all these kind of things. But we just need to watch, if we never burn that initial fire of loving the environment, the child's going to keep coming along between the ages of 8 and 15, and then they'll drop out when they have autonomy and they can speak up for themselves. And it's probably not because football became unfun overnight. It might be because it's never really been fun. They've only been coming
mm,
along because mum and dad control the schedule. They do football on a Thursday, they do gymnastics on a Monday, they brush their teeth at 7, they go to bed at 9, and they
mm,
and they keep coming along. Whereas if we burn that fire when they're really, really young, through autonomy, through play, through letting them sink or swim, through standing back and not giving too much instruction, through giving them problems, not solutions, then I think what happens is that you burn this fire in them that football just becomes a non-negotiable in their life. They just
mm.
absolutely love it. So when they get to 15, they might have a little bit more resilience if like results aren't going their way or they're not getting a lot of game time. The last thing they're going to do is drop out of football. They're going to stay in it because of the journey that and the experience a coach gave them when they were younger. And most people can kind of
Mm.
remember that coach that gave them that, or that feeling or that experience. Or it might be like they move up to the under 16s and they don't like the coach, but instead of dropping out of the sport, they'll just go join another team. So yeah,
Mm,
it's all about context and where you're working in. But with the younger ones, yeah, I think fun is your starting point for everything. Fun's your session plan. Fun is like, I've
mm,
got 15, 20, 30 kids, however many you have. If I make it fun for all of them, then all the good stuff is going to fold out of that. The skill development, the social side, the fitness, because they're really going to run around and invest in things that they enjoy. I think fun's a starting point for everything with the youngest
mm.
age groups.
You've got me. I mean, no, the brilliant points. You're making me think about a couple of things. You actually made me think a little bit about should we be teaching sports at a youth level rather than coaching them? Because, and
Mm,
again, I know sometimes it sounds like just an argument on semantics and what coaching means, but sometimes if you actually think about the behaviours and of a teacher and it's sort of more classical pedagogy way, then you start to see there's um, more patience around mistakes.
yeah,
There's a wider appreciation for what's really trying to be achieved beyond the immediate context of the exercise and performance and other things like that. And I always actually think coaches can learn from teach. Not again, I don't. I say that I don't pander all the time to education. There's some rotten teachers out there as well. But see what you were saying there, David. One of the things I'm keen to know what you think of this because you mentioned around the kids are just coming back because they're forced to. See what this is a wee bit of a bugbear for me because how often, and I mean, you've worked with many coaches and you continuously do work with other coaches in your role. Um, how often do you find coaches I mean, this might just be me, but see, every time a coach says to me, I must be doing something right because they're coming back, I always kind of go, not really, because, a kid could be coming back for all the reasons in the world other than your coaching. And I actually think it's quite a dangerous
yeah,
rhetoric around what is successful and effective coaching because the outcome could be you just don't know what the outcome is for that
yeah,
player. There's kids that come back to sessions, as you say, their mum and dad told them. There's kids that come back to that session in a sort of zero sum way because it allows them to get something. There's kids that come back to the sessions because there's a guilt inducement. They feel like they have to. We
yeah,
are we are talking about fun. Intrinsic motivation at its purest form is the fun and the enjoyment and the interest in something where doing the activity is the reward in itself. That's such a pure form, and it's not to suggest that obviously players don't have other motivations. Of course they do, and we'll come back.
hmm
Actually, we will speak about this later on. Could we leverage that? But what do you think about that when people say that? 'Cause it's just you're making me think about that, and it's just
yeah.
me. It drives me potty sometimes. Just I don't agree with it, but
No, it's right. It's not about them coming. It's about the experience you give them while you're there. Your win as a coach isn't that kids come to your session. It's that you go to their wedding. That's the win as a
yeah,
coach. When
yeah.
20 years later, because another, just to keep throwing out my favorite coaching quotes, another one I really like is like your influence is never neutral. Everything you do has a positive and negative effect. I don't think it's possible to do something that's neutral with children. And unfortunately, for so many coaches who maybe speak to you in that manner and say, "Oh, I must be doing something right. Kids keep coming back," and maybe they're right. But unfortunately, when their name comes up in 15 years' time, straight away that kid's going to put them into a box, and it's going to be one of those two. Oh, I loved
Mm,
working with that coach. He or she was absolutely fantastic, funnest coach ever. They're the reason I'm still playing, or whatever it may be. Or your name might just go straight into that box. It's like they were a nightmare, hated it, used to
mm,
just shout at us all the time. And it tends to be the same with teachers and coaches and whoever it may be. So yeah, they might be coming along because they really really enjoy the coach, and you would like to think there's a parent or guardian responsibility there as well. If your son or daughter's, you and I know a lot of them do kind of come along because parents might be quite stuck on, we've committed to this, I want to stick to it, I want you to give years and you know um see something out, which is a good parenting tool, I think. But we should also be having the conversation with our kids, like, do you want to go to football tonight? Are you enjoying it? Do you like the coach? Might need to have those conversations, but obviously you'll get the kids that will, burst through the door and say, "Oh, I love football today. Coach David said I did this well, or we played my favorite game," and that kind of stuff. So yeah, they'll come back for a whole host of reasons. It might be they love the coach. It might just be that the parents work late and some friends go there and they have to carpool with them for something to do that evening. I don't know. But
yeah.
the testament of a coach is the experience they give, when they're there, and it's not one that you can kind of falsify. Children pick up on body language, they pick up on everything.
Yeah, no, I love that. I like that quote that you invited to the wedding. It makes me think. I mean, I was coached as a young kid, from some men that, do you know what, if I seen them in the supermarket, I would have to go up and just say thank you so much for the
Mm-hmm.
experience you gave us.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't, and they were good enough coaches, but they were just parents as well. But it was just because they were just made it fun. Um, and I want to come back to a point you made at the start around why some coaches maybe avoid it, or not necessarily avoid it, but they just don't prioritise it. It's funny because there is a bit of a separation in thought between fun and development and skill
Mm.
acquisition. Like, there's such a thing as a fun night in football or a fun
Yeah.
night in sport. Like, why? Like, why? I just think
Yeah, like what were you
if
doing?
you're tailoring, you spoke there about there's never a neutral impact, and you have to balance it up. Like, but if you're needing to have a fun night, how much lack of fun are you having the rest of that season? I
Yeah,
find
we
that
get
mad.
that quite a lot. Like it's the last one before the summer, or it's Christmas, so I want a fun session, and you're thinking, what have you been doing the rest of the year?
Aye,
At Christmas you
aye.
want a Christmas theme session, but they should always be fun throughout the year. Yeah, I think if coaches go in with the mindset that fun is their baseline, I think everything that stems off of that will all be good stuff. So I'll give you an example. I know this would be better, obviously, if we were on a pitch, but hopefully I can give an example of a fairly recent session that I've done. So, yeah, you're working with, I don't know, a group of 9-year-olds, and you know that they're still in that phase of we need to make this sport really, really good fun and keep them coming back. So let's make sure every one of them has fun. We have 15 players. Let's make sure every one of them have fun. I'll pitch the session that we're going to do a practice that I think most of them are going to enjoy. There's some really old but gold sessions and ideas out there that have been around for a long time because they are good fun. So, right, we're going to do, king or queen of the ring, whatever it may be, 4 coins, everyone dribbles within, try and keep your ball in the area. Right, but what we're going to do to make sure everyone stays included, which is fun, we'll set up another area. So if your ball gets kicked off, you go and start another game of king or
Mm.
queen of the ring over there. And if you get knocked out of that one, you come back to the initial one. So we have 2 boxes, and they're playing king of the ring, and whatever. Okay, so now I've got my session, and that's my baseline session. But then I think your eye needs to become the coach. Are the children having fun? Are they all having fun? So if it goes a bit semi, I'm thinking like, what will be fun here? Well, let's do a bit of competition. So let's say now everybody starts on 10 points, and if you kick someone's ball out, that's 1 point, and if your ball gets kicked out, that's you minus 1 point. Okay, and now you have this level of competition, which I think would really, really lift it and rise it up. And now it's down to the coach. Oh, Mark's not. I'm going to contradict myself in a few minutes, so hopefully your coaches that are listening see this out. But let's say, for example, Mai becomes a coach. Mark's not enjoying this because it's just too easy for him. Nobody can
Mhm.
kick his ball out, and he can manipulate the ball he's kicking out. I'm going to go say to Mark and say, "Hey, what did you get in the last round? Let's say we're doing minute rounds. Oh, 16. Right. I want you to try and get 17 this time. I want you to try and get 18 this time." Now, fun for Mark is, I don't know, the coach giving him a little bit of individual challenge, a little bit of individual attention, giving him something to aspire to. We've lined up fun for him within the environment. Then there's David, who's not getting a lot of success, and he doesn't look like he's having fun. You're saying, David, I think you're doing fantastic at the tackling. That's something you've always been good at. I want you just to really, really focus on nobody hitting your ball. So we maybe bring it down a little bit of a level, for David. And again, our eye becomes a coach who's not having fun and what they need to do within the environment. Maybe Sarah's there for the first time and she's just like quite anxious and nervous and not really enjoying it at all. You say, Sarah, can you do me a favor? Can you come out? I want you to do 20 keepy ups because you're going to be the time for this activity. When you get 20 keepy ups, it's time up, and I'm going to ask everyone what points there are. Maybe she has to do bounce juggles, whatever it might be. Maybe it's not even keepy ups. Maybe it's trying to kick a ball off a cone 5 times, pass a ball and hit a ball off the cone 5 times next time up. So now fun
Mhm.
for her is the coaches gave her some responsibility. She's a time limit. She gets to shout time up after she knocks a ball off 5 times. So within this one game, you can create this environment where your eyes a coach who's not having fun and what am I going to do? Because all of a sudden that little bit of fun you've gave to Mark, that's going to help his development now because he's working really hard, twisting, turning, manipulating the ball to a higher level than he was a minute ago. You know, the little challenge you gave to David, the little challenge you gave to Sarah, fun was my starting point and fun was my aim. But actually, fun looks like competency. You know, people
Mm.
tend to really lean into things that they feel a level of competency, they feel a level of confidence at. You're making them feel good, and then we can layer up that challenge over the thing. But as I said, I'll contradict myself though. All of those things wouldn't be on my session plan. They would just be in my back pocket if I recognised someone wasn't having fun. Because if within the environment, you know, David's ball's getting kicked out every 2 minutes, but he's just running and getting it and bringing it back in, who cares he's not having success? You know, that comes into our children compete, adults compare. A lot of adults will be quite quick to say, oh, well, I better do something about that. Well, actually, if he's just kind of keeps striving and keeps working hard, your environment's absolutely fine. For me, the telltale sign that you need to have an intervention with a child is when they don't seem to have that fun because it's pitched too high or it's pitched too low or they're not enjoying the activity. That's when you need to come in and mix it up, you know, for me. And that's a real
Mm.
skill as a coach, being able to inject fun on an individual basis into the exercise.
No, I love that. It's almost like your definition of fun's fluid. It's almost like it's individual.
Hmm.
Because yeah, that's true. Because I mean, I've worked with players in the past. I probably was that player actually. That fun for me was being totally out of breath, working
Hmm.
hard, having challenge, having you know, having some sort of need to be resilient. That can be fun. And
Hmm.
again, it might be just knowing your players. Fun for other people is the social dynamic
Yeah.
and actually like you know the more classic laughing and stuff like that. I would wonder then how do we as a coaches? I think it's a really useful way is in using that as a checkpoint. Fun is the base, and that you check in on the fun and you use that you know to sort of shape things, and it's almost like the individual challenge and the support,
Hmm.
the variation. How do we avoid coaches hijacking that role? Because this is something I'm always conscious around the overuse of context because we
Yeah.
always say it depends as coaches, and it does a lot of times. But I always think not
Mm.
always intentionally, but sometimes because actually just it's harder to do things differently to what you always do. So I think sometimes as coaches we are quick, if not intentionally, but unintentionally, quick to find a way of reverting back to what we already do by sort of polluting
Yeah.
the rules of tips that they've been given. So like I could as a coach who's still quite narrow in my view of what produces a good session could go, oh my players, well I've just given a sort of fluid definition of fun, and then they go, well my players need to have challenge and all to have fun. So I'm doing a good job as a coach if I'm making sure they're really challenged.
Yeah.
How do we avoid that? And I know it's actually quite a hard question because I don't
Yeah.
really know the answer. I'm curious just to know your take on it because that's the hard part. I think the
Yeah.
context, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's where the conversations with the where the children come in and meeting them where they are on their journey,
Ah,
because
yeah. So their
you know
voice, their
the
voice.
adults will quite quickly be like,
Yeah.
right, so if you give me any under 15s team in the country right now and ask me to coach them, so many adults listening to this will jump to like, well, they probably have a league to win and they probably have 3 points to get, and you're probably under 15 going to be able to challenge them. Now, then here comes the context. Actually, it's an under 15 team full of boys and girls. Their other teams they can't get a game for because they're not good enough and they just want somewhere to play a more recreational level. So if you don't think along these lines or ask these questions, you don't know. Actually, I'll give you a kind of better example.
Mm,
I worked with an adult team not too long ago, kind of amateur level, you know, ages with me over 35s, that kind of level. Um, and I don't think you can just go in and straight away coach them without the context. So one that
mm,
I do quite often, you might have used it yourself, Mark, is ask all the players within the environment you're going to coach to bullet point the top 10 reasons why they're going to be part of the team, why they're going to play football. Then ask them to prioritize a top three and submit a top three. Now, within that top three of that adult team, the things that came out were fun, to keep playing the game, to get a little bit of fitness. The social side was really important to them, nights out and things like that. And a lot of them actually said they just wanted to get out the house from their wife and kids for a few hours a week. You know,
mm,
none of them said they wanted to win a league. None of them said they would rather sit on the bench and the team win than play. So now I can pitch my sessions and my level for the people that I'm trying to service. It's their game. I'm just their coach. So within that amateur team, we were trying to give equal game time. The kind of thing that you would associate with children's football, we were doing it at adult football because that's why we were showing up. We all just wanted to run out on a pitch and get a kick of the ball. We put on social nights out because they asked for it, and I think it's the same when you're working with children. Don't assume that every one of them want to play for Real Madrid in Scotland one day. What are the motivations of why they're coming along?
Do you know what's really sticking with me there? What you said, it's their game, because I think that is a starting point so important, because when you start to coach, assuming that you've then stopped playing, your time in football's done. Like your job is facilitating someone else's experience. I mean, you can having that mindset, I think, is so important to then ensure that we're checking in on that, because you spoke, and that is a great solution that you just gave there. When you speak to the kids, because all these things that we have in our head, and I always think, experience will always trump intentions. So if you have the best intentions in the world as a coach, it doesn't matter if your kid's experience is different. It's the experience that matters, not your intentions. Yeah. And it's almost like there's so many things that can be fun. So we've established that challenge to be fun, competition can be fun. But what about when it stops being fun? And how will you know when competition stops being fun? How will you know when challenge stops being fun? How will you know when, just the basic way in which you've shaped your practice, or the general atmosphere, or the sort of things that you're doing? How do you know that unless you check in on them? And that comes back to that voice, and giving the voice to the player. I just think that's so important. One of the things, David, I wanted to speak about, actually, and I think it's because it does remind me, just before we move on, because I've had a previous conversation with Colin Cronin, and we spoke about caring coaching, and I see a lot of parallels between, we were speaking around inferred needs versus expressed needs. So you can infer the needs of your players. If you're leaving it up to your own judgment, your own observation, or indeed maybe other people, they still aren't the person that's been impacted, or you can have their needs expressed by actually, touching base with them and actually checking in. Is care being received? And this is the same way as fun being received. And I think it's different terminology, but we're getting it. It's the same sort of thing there. And it's just really interesting seeing the connections. But we spoke a little bit about, or what was coming through to me when you were speaking about giving them that autonomy, but where perhaps mistakes still get made. And I think this sometimes is an argument for why sometimes fun or ownership is seen as separate to progress and development, because we have this sort of, it's like a caricature view of what a coaching session that's autonomy supportive is going to look like, where it's just balls are everywhere, no one's doing anything, there's a lot of unchecked mistakes, there's things going on. And I think that where the nuance is that understanding, because for those that are listening, and I just speak to this point just to kind of fuel your own curiosity, a lot of the things that David's speaking about is it's like self-determination theory, and one of the main things around self-determination theory is that autonomy must come with structure. So autonomy support it's supporting autonomy. The idea of support is offering structure around it, offering the catch point where, look, if a player's continuously making a mistake and it's in a fun environment, we still can coach that. If there's kids that maybe aren't understanding how to bracket what they're doing, or maybe they're not maybe equipped yet to make the right choices that are both fun and developmental, then give them selection that encourages both things. So it's not diluting the role of the coach. It's actually, because an autonomy supportive coach, David, at least in my experience, I think they're highly involved. It's just that they're not restrictive. They don't constrain, and that's hard, by the way, as well. I think that's hard, and it takes skill. You need to learn how to be more autonomy supportive. But that might be the bit where there's a healthy tension. I think if we remove one part of that, and you just have autonomy, that can be where there's problems, and maybe that's what puts coaches off, fun, and using fun as a base point. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, because like it can be there can be a misconception there. Like, so is David saying that the kids should show up and we should put them on a pitch and just let them do what they want? Absolutely not. But is that maybe a place for that for the first 5 minutes? Do we have an understanding that children aren't climbing trees, toy wrestling, chasing each other as much as they were. So they do need that bit of kind of physical literacy and those motor skills. So I use the terminology of kind of free play within my session. It is a brilliant tool for a contingency plan as coaches. My session's not quite going right and I need to set up something else. Right, boys and girls, 5 minutes free play. They know what it means. They can go grab a ball, they can shoot on each other, they can do some cartwheels, they can get the cones out and mess around, and then we're back in. So that's kind of what you would call play. Letting children play is when adults completely get out of the way and we embrace play. But there's huge.
Do you ever watch that as well, David? Do you ever watch what's going on during the moments too?
Yeah,
Because that can be a real
absolutely.
insight too.
Absolutely, I think you have to, because you can, for a safety element, but you can see what they enjoy as well. But it's great to see that if you do kind of get out of the way a bit, games of kind of World Cup and World Cup doubles, some of them are playing them, but some of them are like almost inventing them. They're not playing World Cup because their mum or dad's told them about it. They kind of just realize, well, there's a goal here. There's 5 of us. You two play against you two, and I'll go in goals. And it's just amazing to see like all this stuff kind of come back. So big for the social element as well. So that's what you would call play, but a big part of bringing autonomy is like co-created play. Creating an environment between the children and between the coach that's going to bring play and autonomy to the surface. And that idea of co-creation can be quite a clever way for the coach to get their desired outcomes out, which might be obviously finish and passing, whatever it might be. There's loads of autonomy within it, but, we've created something that's going to get us a little bit more, development as well.
And what do you think is useful about co-creation? And maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that then. But
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what is useful about co-creation from a sort of pedagogical viewpoint? How is it helps having that input for also your own learning, maybe even your own memory consolidation? What did you speak to a little bit of that in your opinion? What's useful about that from a teaching or coaching standpoint?
Yeah. So, co-created play is like thinking, okay, what do I want to achieve? But I want to have a play and a games-based approach to achieve it, because that will give the children the autonomy. That will give them the games-based approach that we need. And you're right. Like coaches can have this some coaches can have this fear of play because they think like development suffers. But I would task anyone to think about Ronaldinho playing in the streets of Brazil with no adult intervention and the skill level that would be developed there. Sometimes we come in and we're too quick to coach and minimize the touches and tell players they need to pass because they're just, there's nothing wrong with a skilled player having loads of repetition of confidence and creativity and being supported just to do things over and over and over again. So I just think the idea of just kind of free play and small-sided games there is a place for, but co-created play could be as simple as, right, we're going to play a game today, but asking the children, right, we've worked on, a little bit of passing within the session earlier. Can anyone think of something we could do within the game for a bonus point? Or does anyone think of a rule we can put on the game to bring passing? And they feel as if they have that autonomy. They feel as if they have that involvement and ownership, and they feel valued. So when they come up with a game and they say, oh, well, we could say that every time you pass is a point, and, if you score, that's how many points you get, something fun like that. As a coach, you've been quite facetious because that's the game you wanted to play anyway. But instead of being the dictator and saying, right, you're going to do this, and nobody really likes being told what to do, particularly children. Any parents listening or coaches listening probably know that sometimes when you tell a child what to do, they'll do the opposite, So what we've done there is we've been quite facetious and them telling us a game we were going to play anyway, and it's co-created play. We came up with that game together. And that's why when I put my daughter to bed at night, I say to her, don't you be reading that book, Nora. Go straight to bed. And then next thing I know, I turn around, she's reading the book. You can be quite clever with how you bring along those different learning styles,
Yeah, no, entirely. It's that sort of manipulation, isn't it? But in a good way, it's good manipulation. It's making me think a little bit about. There's a lot of. Could we speak about how we can sometimes assess learning, and how do we assess it? And do you know what's interesting? I think when you're speaking about co-creation, you got me thinking around Says I've done it myself, and like let's say you're doing a little condition game or whatever, and you say to the players, right, what is the condition for the game?
Yeah.
Now you could, in some ways, connect the dots to have a bit more of an understanding of their awareness of perhaps what is required in order to do a still well based on perhaps the types of conditions they come up with, because like it has to be a first time finish or something like that. Well, if a kid comes up with that, it may be just a reproducing something that you've heard before, but I would
Yeah.
probably argue, I'd probably give them a bit more credit than that. They probably are recognizing the difficulty of doing that based or compared to perhaps where it was just you could shoot at any time. And again, that could, if anything, if it doesn't lend itself straight away for you to see very clear evidence of them carrying out training and deliberate practice even within
Yeah.
that, autonomy support, it's at the very least offering a really potent conversation starter
Yep.
where you can then speak to them about why have you chose that one, that's interesting, or is it challenging enough? Well, and there's a conversation to be had there. I think co-creation's that's pretty cool. I wonder as well, but again, people might be listening and they go, but they'll just take the easy route. But again, will they, if they're playing against their peers and there's a
Nah.
competitive element and they know that, what if you can choose the other team's condition?
Yeah,
There's
because
ways that we can make
they
that.
enjoy that challenge. Sorry to cut in there, Mark. They enjoy
No,
that
correct.
challenge. And what the adults and the coaches listening to this need to remember is at some point they were kids too, and they
Mm,
had all the answers for all the issues of dealing with mixed ability levels, engagement, and fun. Somewhere along the line, we forgot them. The kids we're working with, they have all the answers. Now, they might take a little bit of time and support to get there because it's new to them if you're not someone who believes in autonomy and co-created play, or this is all new to you. But when we were children, and we played World Cup doubles, if there was an odd number, a kid would say, "Oh, I'll go by myself," or "Put those three together," or "We'll play the first round, and whoever goes out can partner up with the person who went out." None of us as kids, were chapping on an adult's door and saying, "We have an odd number, we don't know what to do here." You know?
mm,
We would
mm,
come up with games, we would come up with rules, we'd come up with things to make sure everybody was involved. If hopefully some of your listeners come from an environment of street football like myself, didn't matter how many children we have, didn't matter the boys and girls that maybe didn't really like football. We found a way that everybody played and everybody had fun and everybody had a role, and we developed through adding our own rules and our own little bonuses and our own little challenges. You know, we didn't want an adult there to take away the fun, the autonomy, and sometimes, on your point, Mark, of fun and development, to stifle our creativity and stifle our potential. At no point would I chat my friend Graham's door and say, "Bring your dad out so he can tell us to play two touch." That
mm,
would just never happen. We would come up with games that were fun, and if they weren't fun, we would reinvent them.
mm,
Um, we would reinvent them somehow. We used to do a game, Mark. I don't know if I'll be able to paint the picture. I kind of stayed in a quite a large estate where there was different corners and different, branch off to go to different houses, right? Up near my house, there was two sets of drains, and up the road, up to the left, up to the right, other side of the estate. You're talking probably about the size of a football pitch was the size of the estate, but around a couple of corners there was another drain. And we used to play a game where the ball would start on one drain. There'd be like 10 of us, and we'd
mm,
just shout play. And whoever could stop the ball on the other drain, all the way up the other side of the estate, foot on the ball, would win. And we would just play. And we'd
mm,
sabotage each other. And some of us would get street smart, like work together and, to get up there. But one of our friends who wasn't really that into football, he would start halfway up the street. We came
mm.
up with like these different rules and these different things. He would start halfway up the street and we'd kind of come across him and he would come into the game. We had all these like, really, really fun games that were brilliant for development, and we made sure everybody plays. We would
Yeah.
say, "Oh, nobody can tackle David's little brother." That was just a rule. You know,
Yeah, yeah. They
and
might
nobody,
also say like, they might make it deliberately unfair for the better player too.
yeah.
And there's an element of right, you need to monitor it obviously, but there's an element that's pretty good too because I probably would I would argue that you could probably observe times in a lot of coaches' sessions when they're working with children that they don't you say the word sabotage, but they don't make things unfair at times.
No, no.
And sometimes a little bit of unfairness is useful because again it's about preparation for the sport, which at times is unfair. It's a little bit like, do you always do, and again I'm not necessarily trying to speak for every sport, but in a lot of sort of invasion type sports, football being one of them, or basketball, we might see 3v2 in the attacker's favour, and we do that routine. But how often are we doing two attackers against three defenders? How often
Yeah,
are we doing the thing that's by the fact that it's catering to the needs of the better players, the take players in a way that they need more challenge. It is being inclusive in the same
yeah,
extent. If we look at inclusivity from the viewpoint of equal opportunity to get better or equal opportunity to have challenge, and I know this starts to stretch away, at least from some people's view of fun, but it isn't
yeah.
it's not an exact science, but there's things to that too that I think is quite interesting.
Well,
Let
but it's
kids
a,
be cheats sometimes.
yeah,
Let them
I
sort
know.
it out.
Yeah, I
You
know it's
know.
something we might come on to, but it's a huge part of the scoreboard soccer design is that, constantly changing picture and lining up the challenge with the player's individual ability. So what will come out within that design very, very often is a player who can cope with the challenge being 1v3, 1v4. It's such a huge part, and I totally agree with you because, we talk about developing like the next Messi or Ronaldo doing 1v1 drills, then we turn on the TV and Messi's dribbling by six players.
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
create environments where players can actually work on that because it'd be great if that's what they would do for maybe the national team one day. In
Mm,
Scotland, it's not about developing someone to play for Scotland, it's about developing someone to play for Scotland and beat France and beat Brazil
mm.
and beat Argentina. We really do. And we're seeing some great stuff out there around development, but no, I totally agree, and it's certainly a big part of my stuff around
So
trying to take players out of their comfort zone.
yeah, so and we're due to turn our attention now towards it. One last question I do have, maybe thinking more universally. I'm interested to know about coming back a little bit to how we can kind of get coaches out of their kind of rut a little bit and get them
Yeah,
to maybe be a bit more aware of the benefits of fun, maybe from a learning standpoint. If it's not so much about the impact that fun can have on learning the mechanics of the move, could you speak to perhaps the negative impact that not having fun can have on our approach to learning and how we see that person and how we engage or don't engage with that
yeah,
person and their learning process for us? I wonder
yeah.
if you were touching on some stuff there. I think I'd love to hear a bit more of your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think fun is such a big part of the learning experience because of the things that stem out from it. So the experience is probably one they're going to remember and reminisce about in their mind. So that's extra development as well. They're potentially going to tell someone, a mum or a dad or whoever it might be, "Oh, I loved that session because I scored a goal when Mark said well done," and they're vocalizing the experience. And if we don't have fun, we
Mm,
don't have all these things, right? We just remove this. We don't have that reminiscent of the feeling they had when they had fun, the feeling when they scored the goal, the feeling they now want to go back, the feeling that they want to get the ball and do it in their back garden to further enhance their development, their skills, because when they did it the first time, it was really, really good fun. So if we don't have these things, if we veer a little bit more into, oh, well, fun doesn't equal development, which I massively disagree with, we need to do something a little bit more serious over here. It's a really dangerous path for coaches, not just for the child's enjoyment, but for the coach's enjoyment as well. And I can say that with some certainty because I've been there. I've been there as a younger coach that's been like, I'm really, really going to work on passing and moving today because I watched Pep Guardiola's Barcelona the other night, and I think that's the way to play the game. I'm really going to work on passing and moving. The group I'm working with, five or six of them were not ready to work on passing. They hadn't manipulated the ball. Three or four of them didn't even know where the inside of their foot was that I was talking about. I've pitched it at the wrong level. It's not fun for them. Now I'm getting frustrated. I'm doubling down by saying, come on, we should be able to do this. And, pass and move. It's so simple. And my enjoyment as a coach, the amount of time I spent as a younger coach, drive home thinking that was torture. I'm glad that session's over. Now, as
mm,
a coach who really puts an emphasis on fun, I think I'm getting a lot better at pitching it at the right level for the individuals within my session. The session just flies by for me just as much as it does for the kids as well. I'm
mm,
really big on a games based approach. So my sessions typically will have 4 or 5 games. It'll have caterpillar tag, it'll have slam ball, it'll have finding Nemo, it will have 4 or 5 games. And I just know they're filled with hidden learning. They're filled with touches of the ball, they're filled with finishing, they're filled with attacking and defending situations. I'll show up, we'll play 5 games, and the kids would just leave absolutely buzzing.
Mm.
That wasn't my approach to session planning when I first started. It was like technical information and what part of the foot to use. And the reality is, when you give the kids the carrot of winning a game, they work out how to kick the ball to hit that target, or how. So I'm not sure how well I'm answering the question, but it's like we've kind of reiterated on this call. I think fun, all the good stuff stems out of it. If fun's not your starting point, that's when the frustration can come in. That's when most kids aren't going to hold their hand up and say, Coach David, I'm struggling a little bit with this. Can you help me? What they're going to do is they're going to disengage and they're going to mess around. And they're going to get the blame for it. But actually, it's just a masking mechanism that they use to save face in front of their peers. The reason they're messing around, it's the coach's fault because they've not pitched it at an engaging and fun environment that the children want to do instead. So that's a really big detriment to not having fun in your session. The kids want to save face in front of their peers, so they'll do something funny. They'll kick a ball away. They'll throw a cone. You need to watch out for that.
Yeah, it's bang on, and I think it speaks a little bit to the interpersonal nature of skill acquisition or pedagogy, where we want to view it, because, like you just demonstrated there, if a player doesn't, you could put it down, if they don't trust their environment, and I would say it sounds straight radical to say, if they don't feel appreciated or accepted by the person in front of them, or they feel that the environment in some way isn't what they feel they need, and if that is around the sensation of feeling good about yourself, or being able to laugh, that environment isn't necessarily serving them, so they aren't going to serve the environment. I don't think kids are that altruistic that are going to just be how we want them to be, irrespective of how we treat them. And if you then consider, you might have the best sort of pedagogical plan in the world, the best approach to get this player to develop skills, and you might be the best game-based coach in the world, but if you're not engaging with them and trying to make them smile, or try to at least reach a point where they feel that they are getting what they want out of your environment, and whatever the sort of definition of fun is, the operationalization of that just isn't going to work. It's interesting as well, David, you mentioned actually around how it helps you as the coach. I think that is super, super important. Like, there's actually some research out there to show that coaches, now we're doing to speculate a little bit here, and just forgive me, but it's making me think about, there's some research within a sort of self-determination theory framework that has actually shown that when coaches themselves have got more controlled motivations for being there, so that could be that, they don't particularly enjoy it because they're too caught up sometimes in the technical tack or whatever, how the session's flowing, or there's a bit of a guilt inducement around, I need to go because my wee boy's sessions don't going to run otherwise. If we go into spaces continuously with that as being what draws us towards the activity, the research has found correlations actually between that sort of controlled motivation for doing it that isn't autonomy support, it isn't volitional, and actually controlling behaviours towards players, behaviours that aren't autonomy supportive. So there's a real people think sometimes that the coach and the athlete are disconnected. They really aren't, because it's reciprocal. The athlete affects the coach and the coach affects the athlete. And when we then combine that stuff, and I know we're thinking bigger here than we're, but if we combine that with even that we're speaking about, if you aren't treating the players well and you aren't thinking about making them smile and have fun, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy happening there. It's just a vicious circle of things going on. And it's just, it's something we have to be mindful of. So how can we fix it? So what I want to go into now is one really great way I think that coaches can fix it is by considering soccer scoreboard. So tell us, David, first, what is soccer scoreboard? I know it's taken us a while to get there, but I think it's been really useful to know the underpinning values to why you came up with this tool, and I think it really showcases it even more deeply. So tell us, what's soccer scoreboard now? How can it help with all the things we just spoke about?
Yeah, it's just a method of coaching I found hugely beneficial to make the sessions fun and increase development. I've found players certainly develop within the environment. So yeah, I'm a big fan of like small-sided games, 3v3s, 4v4s, 5v5s, but I am mindful of the reality that when you just play 3v3, 4v4 and 5v5, as a coach, you can have all these mixed ability levels, you can have disengagement, you can have players maybe not striving to do their absolute best and therefore not investing in their own development. I'll give you just one little example, but things can happen all over the field. Like, I'll just let Mark dribble by me and score, because then I get to lift the ball out the net, and then I get to play. So I just feel as if when I was delivering small-sided games, I needed an extra layer of motivation for everybody to work hard. And that's when I came up with the scoreboard. It was about 8 years ago now. I started to design these little games where, okay, boys and girls, we're playing 3v3, but I've set up a crossbar challenge right next to the pitch. And if you do something really good, you get to go over there for a kind of bonus goal. So we're just playing football. We're just playing 3v3, and we're keeping the score. But there's a scoreboard over there to get more points. So now, as a coach, all you do is you observe and you reward positive behaviours. So you say, Mark, fantastic goal. Go over to the scoreboard. Mark's now removed. He's over there, doing something technical. Beat the goalie, a crossbar challenge, whatever your scoreboard is. Perform 5 juggles and then come back on. And the ball gets shared more touches between the other participants, just to help even further development of the whole squad. And obviously, I don't need to tell you, Mark, and some of your listeners will be, familiar with the concept. Whatever you reward and praise, they're now motivated to repeat those behaviours, and with time, you get really good habits. So saying, David, great communication or great scanning, come to the scoreboard. David's now motivated to repeat that behaviour, and so are all the other children. They'll hear their teammate get sent to the scoreboard for scanning, and all of a sudden you see all these young boys and girls starting to scan because they want to be sent over to the scoreboard. So a real simple concept, because it's a games-based approach. It exposes them to small-sided games, which we know is great for development and for engagement, but just gives them that extra layer of motivation, that extra layer of reward. And for your coaches listening, their only real challenge is coming up with scoreboards or using some of the ones I've already got on the website that tie into the motivations of their players. With adult players, I do the crossbar challenge and they absolutely love it. With the younger players, we've got some that are called like Finding Nemo and Connect 4 and some really kind of crazy ones. But yeah, hopefully some of your listeners will give it a try, Mark.
Is that intentional that you're just a couple of things there? I want to come back to the idea that you've showcased actually how this isn't just for kids actually, and I see that this could be used for adults. There's some, it might even be position specific exercises that are done on the back as the scoreboard element to it maybe, but that Finding Nemo type thing, why not call it something different? Why is there a reason behind this sort of storytelling or something that sounds quite familiar to children? I just want to know, what was the thinking behind that?
Just whatever they engage with. So Finding Nemo's one I do with probably younger children who are first experiencing small-sided games. We're trying to develop them the love for playing the game. And if you just said 3v3, 4v4, go and play, it would be a bit of a riot. Like, you really need to get the numbers down for touches. So Finding Nemo's one I do where we put this big island of cones next to the pitch, and I hide a 5p piece, and I say, right, boys and girls, has anyone seen the film Finding Nemo? And most of them would tell, where does Nemo live? And I'm like, right, this is a coral reef. Underneath one of the cones is a 5p piece. And if you do something good on the pitch, you have 5 seconds to run over, flip a coin, and the first one to find Nemo wins. So that's just tying into the motivation of that age group. There's a storyline, there's a familiar character, there's a reward. And now, without the Finding Nemo scoreboard, you'd maybe have a load of kids kind of disengaged, playing with the grass, running around, chasing the ball. Now you have a load of kids that are, I don't know, trying to spread out, trying to be creative, trying to take players on. You just praise their behaviours and they run over. So Finding Nemo's a great one for the kind of 8, 9 and 10-year-olds. Again, it's just small-sided games, but Finding Nemo's a really popular scoreboard. With the kind of 11 and 12-year-olds, we do the water bottle flip challenge. And I'm sure loads of your listeners will know, how kids love to flip a water bottle and land it the right way up? When I put that next to the small-sided games as a scoreboard, my game becomes like the World Cup final. All these boys and girls are just desperate for me to say, great pass or great movement off the ball or great communication with a teammate. Come try and flip the water bottle. So it's about lining up the scoreboard with the people you're working with. But the concept never changes. Small-sided games with that fun reward on the side.
Yeah. By the way, I think there'll be some teachers that were a bit unhappy to hear that if people were doing that in their class. Actually, I hate it because kids come and do it. I've been with teams before and they do it in the changing room and it makes a mess and someone's, just, But anyway, no, I think, I see in that as well. That sounds like a really useful way of building instant connection as well, because a lot of times as adults, it's very hard sometimes to connect with players on their terms. But
Yeah,
see, you're making me think back to the times where I've asked the players about FIFA or about what happens at Fortnite, and their eyes light up, not just because they can talk about something that really interests them, but they
yeah,
can share that with you. I
yeah,
think that, I mean, what an easy win. And we
yeah.
spoke about how important that is, that connection. Um, I've done it in the past, and it's not been so much so with the soccer scoreboard, but indeed I've done a sort of version of that, and you can critique me on it in a moment because I've listened to your work in the past, David, and I've always been a big fan of it. But I've even I've done a bit of co-creation before where I've met players, right? Like who's got a good video game that they like? We were kind of gamifying it, and they'd come up with
Yeah.
like Fortnite and the boogie bomb, and it was like, right, as soon as someone done something that was challenging, they were able to throw a bib in someone, and then I think they have to do a funny dance from Fortnite. But it was just like they just loved it, and they just couldn't wait for it. But it was that familiarity that was just really key. Um, can we chat about then?
Right.
But what you'd mentioned about working with adults with this. So this
Yeah.
isn't just for kids. Tell us more about that. It isn't
Well,
just, it doesn't seem like it.
it's for any age group that can benefit from small-sided games. So my adult team, when we come back from a summer break, a pre-season, small-sided games are absolutely brilliant for our fitness. But we'll do a scoreboard as well. Come over and hit a penalty kick to try and get a point. But all of a sudden, it changes the problem on the small-sided field. Like we spoke about earlier, you have that 3v2, that 3v2 attacking overload. Can that team try and score before the player at the scoreboard gets back in? We have that 2v3 defending outnumbered. Can we delay the attack until our teammate gets in? And just to quickly go back to something you spoke on earlier around the attacking overloads, you know, if David's dominating the ball, if we go back to kind of children for a minute, if David's dominating the ball in scoreboard soccer, it's a great way to say, well, keep doing that, because dribbling by 3 or 4 players is a great thing, brilliant. We can remove David to go to the scoreboard to do a juggling challenge or throw-in challenge, whatever your scoreboard might be, and else can get a touch. But what you could do as well, and I do this often, instead of removing him, I'll send his 2 or 3 teammates to the scoreboard at the same time,
Mm.
intentionally, and leave David 1v3, 1v4. So yeah, scoreboard soccer. I mean, I've played it as an adult. I've coached it as to adult groups. Any group that can do small-sided games, I'd encourage your coaches to try the idea of adding a scoreboard, a fun challenge at the side that can reward effort. It can reward the behaviours that you value as a coach, and everybody listening to this will have different things they want to put more value on, and just keep football competitive. Sometimes when we just do small-sided games, coach can, forget the score. Scoreboard soccer, a big part of it is that healthy competition. We can see who's winning, and we all strive to get the next point on the scoreboard.
And how do we encourage a healthy competitive environment with the scoreboard while retaining the inclusivity of everyone getting the fair crack at the whip of being able to feel good after it? Is it about
Yeah,
you need to have stroke? I'm wondering that example you gave there, where the person that done the thing well, they weren't necessarily the person sent to the scoreboard. So is that one way in which, for those that might be wondering, actually, I don't want to do that because then the better players just get to do something that the other players don't. It can be again adapted,
yeah.
and
You would
that
always
that's interesting.
you would always line up praise and reward with the individual in front of you. So if Sarah's there for the first time, what good might look like to her is just kicking the ball. Sarah, I love that you had the confidence just to touch the ball, come to the scoreboard. That was brilliant. In fact, take 2 shots at the scoreboard. That was excellent. Now you've
Mm,
connected with her, you've supported her. She's going to go try and get another touch on the ball. That might be her
mm,
baseline and how you whatever. But then there might be David, who's a really, really good player, and he has to score 2 or 3 goals before you say, David, brilliant, come to the scoreboard. And it might be saying, um, maybe David is someone who does have to release the ball a little bit more, you know, and that's what you're going to send him to the scoreboard for. Maybe needs to use his left
okay.
foot a little bit more. It's a coaching tool. That's what it is. Whatever you praise, whatever you reward, that's what they're going to repeat. And you might be aware, Mark, but I do quite a lot of talks on scoreboard soccer, go around different clubs and coaches and things, and I won't go through my full presentation, but we do quite a bit of work on, how to set it up, how to deliver it, scoreboards that tie into different age groups, how to do the praise, how to apply the praise, when to apply the praise, making sure we don't say to a group, right, boys and girls, the scoreboard today is Finding Nemo. We've been working on using our non-dominant foot, so if you use your non-dominant foot, you'll go to the scoreboard. That is a big
Mm.
no-no in scoreboard soccer, because all you do is corrupt their motivation. They don't use their left foot because they've recognised the time and the space and where their teammates are. They just do something because an adult's going to give them a reward. That's not problem solving, decision making, and learning through a games based approach. Scoreboard soccer, and again, if happy to have follow up conversations with anybody listening. Let them play, catch them doing good. And when you see something
Mm.
good, you reward it, send them over for the scoreboard for that bonus point, and then they repeat that behaviour. We're literally, and I've spoken about this earlier, our eye is becoming the coach. Let them play, and catch them doing good. I think it's a really positive way to coach. I think that positive reinforcement, there's a real place for it. Sometimes our default mindset as coaches is like, well, what are people doing wrong and what do I need to correct and what do I need to highlight and what do I need to fix? There's a huge place for catching children doing good.
Yeah. Do you know, you're making me think a little bit about this is more as a coach developer now. I'm thinking a little bit more about what you said there around people can get this wrong. And I actually think, and this isn't just speak to soccer scoreboard, but autonomy supportive coaching, it could be constraint, it could be game-based coaching,
Yep.
coaching that maybe goes away from someone's sort of existing schema and their way of seeing things and viewing things. I think we're quite, I think we're more likely to blame the technique than to blame our delivery of it. I think, and
Yeah.
this is an issue sometimes when people are trying to learn something new, they don't maybe have that honest reflection where they go, it's not soccer scoreboard that didn't work tonight. I didn't do it correctly. It's not autonomy supportive coaching that's wrong. I need to get better at doing it. Sometimes your participants need to get better at doing it as well. And again, that's another kind of conversation that can be
Yeah.
had there around they have to learn that new approach. They have to, learn how to be more autonomous.
Yep.
Uh, they have to learn how to be in an environment that actually is more reinforcement of praise. And because again, that's the other things that people, if they aren't used to it, they can recoil a little bit and they aren't quite sure
Yeah.
about how to take it. They're always in a way of assessing and the threat of what they see. It just depends. But it does make me think that. I think it's really important. It's like we need to get better at things and not blame things, because that's where you can then critique things properly. When you become really good at something
Yeah.
and it's verifiable, then you can critique it. Sometimes up until that point, I think you need to work again better at that thing. Um, one of the things, David, I wanted to know about was, well, there was two things, but the first one was, and this is based on me having a little go at a small aspect of it, and again, it won't be to the standard. I need to get better at it. It won't be
Yeah.
to the standard that you do it. But I had a situation where I was working with my players not that long ago, and we were in like a hall,
Yeah.
and they were doing their sort of 4v4 of a 5v5 game, and I made it that when they score a goal, they hit the bench, because there was a basketball hoop near us, I actually allowed them to just do a layup in the basketball hoop. Now, is that representative of the game? No. Did they really enjoy it and were they really excited when they got to score? Yes. So
Yeah.
should I care about the fact that it wasn't representative of the game? I want to know your opinion on representativeness, because I know it's really important, but does it need to be the most important thing all the time? I wonder, because
Yeah.
it made me think a little bit about this. Again, we can
Yeah.
take it too far, but does soccer scoreboard play around with that? Or actually is there a way that's actually is a bit more functional and focused that I'm maybe not realising?
Yeah. Well, there's more than one way to coach. I don't do scoreboard soccer the full session every session. You do need to do
Mm,
more realistic things at times. But anytime you put a cone or a mannequin or a bib on a pitch, the game becomes false. So
mm,
don't worry about it always being, or else we wouldn't have any drills or skill practices or game related practices or condition games. But I would say, in the scoreboard you've said there, it's on the website. It's under the physical literacy scoreboards. Multi sports are great. Um, yeah, I would say it is really, coming over and shooting a basketball isn't representative of the game of football. But the 3v2 you've created with someone recovering back onto the pitch, back into position, or to help the attack, that is really creative. And that's a big part of the scoreboard design. And again, there's a place for a 20 by 30 pitch and we just play 4v4 football. But I think if you pause a professional game of football, it's a little 3v2, it's a 2v1, it's a 4v4. But crucially, it's the constantly changing picture the players need to adapt to. I had a great moment, in my opinion, up in Drybrough the other week when a club invited me to go out and do some scoreboard soccer. Um, a girl like moved away from the ball into great space, and I was like, "Oh, I love that!" Come to the scoreboard. She wasn't even touching the ball, and I just noticed out the corner of my eye that the girl on the ball was just shaping up to pass to her, and I'm thinking, "Oh my goodness!" Like that girl was just about to pass to her, and I've sent her to the scoreboard. That just gave the player on the ball a different problem. So what she did, she ended up having to dribble. The passing lane was gone because I'd sent her over to the basketball challenge or whatever it might be. The pictures changed. Passing options gone. She dropped the shoulder and she tried to take the opposition girl on. So yeah, I think there is a lot of realism on it, but coaching sport and coaching football isn't always about realism. So I know I'm being really facetious here, but
No.
is Man City's professional team going into the gym realistic training for football? Absolutely not. But they're working their bodies, right? It's not realistic thing in football. That kid that you're sending to the scoreboard to do a layup, they're working their calves, they're working their hands, they're working their coordination, they're working their hand-eye coordination, they're working their arms to take throw-ins. So, yes, it might not be relative to the game of football, but the skills that you're developing through the physical literacy of taking a layup, absolutely they will need on the football pitch.
So firstly, that's what I was hoping to understand, and actually that makes me feel a bit better about that, because the physical literacy aspect, and then it's like, oh, well, what if you're in context, and we all think of it transferable skills across sport. So that's interesting. That's my get out of jail card. Do you know what's interesting what you said there, actually, when you refer to like the Man City players? Is it then the case that maybe, because what I see here is, and it's something I think, oh, it's coaches, we have to be okay with tensions all the time, because there's never one thing that can be done everywhere
Yeah.
to the great effect. There's some things that become some spaces for so long. Is it perhaps better to view a player and what makes up the best player as a sum of all parts? And if we start to sometimes, not in a sense to try and say that we're trying to separate and keep it that way, the different parts that can make up a player, but I think about an effective player as a player who is, technically gifted, tactically astute, someone
Yeah.
who has fun, someone who's the drive, determination. We can approach all those factors and try to sort of develop them simultaneously, and there's a lot of ways that we can
Yeah.
do that, or at least tick off most. But there are some that at certain times can be given their own thing and their own importance, and that's where maybe we have a license as coaches to sometimes not care about what our practice loses, and
Yeah.
always, and again, we're thinking almost about how we need to stop being deficit viewing and think more about the positives. What does your practice have? Not stop thinking about what it doesn't have. Because,
Yeah.
and again, this comes back to perhaps another reason why coaches don't always do things that are different, because
Yeah.
we're very insecure and we're very worried about how we look, and what we're doing is it good enough? I think most coaching sessions are good enough, provided most coaches lean in onto what they are doing well. And I
Yeah.
think with fun, this is where I think Soccer Scoreboard is just one example, but a really good example of that, where we can drive fun at the expense of other things. And you know what? We'll probably still make up for it in the longer term journey. They're still going to be, we'll make up for it at different points. But it's
Mhm.
that fun part of the coaching, knowing how important that is for everything else. And we spoke about not just the connection, but also the impact that the connection that you have with your player has on their approach to learning. There's so much more to be gained from that. And I think
Yeah.
this is trying to sort of bring fun up in the hierarchy of coach concerns,
Yeah.
because we need to start to view fun as a really crucial part that's at the core of a successful coaching process. Now, I really love
Hmm.
that I think there's a bit of an, and I might be sorry if I'm imparting that influence as if that's to suggest that was built into it, but the way I'm interpreting it, and that's what's amazing about the way we can interpret things as coaches differently. That's what I love most about this. I think that's what I find interesting about this.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just got me thinking that way. See, another thing I wanted to ask you, David.
Yeah.
You've all these players. Now, not every player on your team, let's say outside of a sort of performance context, but even then, you might hazard that they have different motivations. They do.
Yeah.
We Timmy loves coming. he needs to be, he goes to sleep in his football shorts and socks. He's there every time. He loves doing the exercises. He just loves doing any exercise, loves football. And then you've got Stephen that's come alongside him and he just hates it, or at least it's his first time, or he's shy.
Yeah.
It seems like when I look at soccer scoreboard that you're touching, it seems like a means of bringing in and including people in sessions who can come with varying levels and types. And I don't just say level. We aren't really motivated or demotivated. Everyone's motivated just by different things. It seems like it's inclusive of different types of motivation.
Yeah.
Is that true? Have you found that effective?
You're absolutely spot on. And the best example I have of that is when I go and work on schools, right? Work in schools. You have teachers, primary school teachers. There's boys and girls in the class that are always asking for football, but the teacher's maybe not that competent and a wee bit uncomfortable delivering it because their skill set maybe lies in the classroom. So you go into schools, you've got boys and girls that play for local clubs and like football, and you have some of the boys and girls in the class that when football's mentioned, they just absolutely tune out. So what Scoreboard Soccer brings is we're playing 3v3 and 4v4 football. So the kids who love football, they're already all in. But when we say to the other ones, oh, and you can get points just by trying your best, what you need to do is you need to come over here and roll these two dice. And if you can add the numbers together, that's a point for your team. Now, all of a sudden, the pupils in the class that quite like math, that quite like numbers, that quite like counting, and obviously the teachers are loving it because we do loads of educational scoreboards that tie into transferable skills. Maybe that's what they enjoy. Maybe it's the Finding Nemo or the water bottle flip challenge, whatever it might be. So, yeah, a big part of Scoreboard Soccer is with the younger ones about making them fall in love with the game. Because just playing 3v3, 4v4, it won't be enough for so many kids because they'll never touch the ball. But we can give everybody success in Scoreboard Soccer because we line it up to what success looks like for them. And a lot of people ask me, why do you call it scoreboard? I didn't think we should be keeping scores and competition at the youngest age groups. And I'm like, the name is really, really important because the scoreboard reflects who tried their best today. Doesn't matter that Mark plays for Rangers or Celtic Pro Youth and Sarah's kicking a ball for the first time. If Sarah tries her best, she beats Mark because the scoreboard reflects effort, and that can really, bring children in. So yeah, long story short, I hope I answered the question there. Half the group might engage in the sport, the other half might engage in the fun challenge, as long as you line it up to what children that age enjoy.
Yeah, no, you've answered it brilliantly. It's fun for me, David, to try and forgive me, I'm going to try and connect this back to sort of some of the academic frameworks that I think a lot of people who might be listening, they're sort of often enveloped by and they're trying to make sense of it. And I think sometimes they incorrectly are led by things that we need to see the professional credibility of it in order to fully understand the uses, and sometimes when we need to go against it. And when I look at your approach of how you can include people with varying motivation types, it makes me think about, and this just comes back to my own area, like that we internalize reasons or for why we might want to do something, that we can internalize more external reasons to over time become more intrinsic in why we take part in an activity. And like you spoke to, that you could set up a 4v4 and that in itself is enough for some players. For other players, participants, whatever you want to call them, they might need that carrot. They might need that. And the reason why I say this is because there's often a lot, and I think it's false. Not that I think it's false, but that has to be understood and met with professional judgment. There's sometimes that opposite argument that, see, if you could just give a reward-based system, that kids are only ever going to be motivated towards doing it for the sake of getting the reward and not the intrinsic reason, which I understand on paper, people. But I think what that argument neglects is that it's not that it's that zero-sum approach all the time, forever, infinitely. It's actually that in order to just catch that person and to get them into a space where you can work on the more intrinsic reasons, and in order to get them into a space where you can get them to internalize the reasons for why they want to be there, you need to capture them some way. And maybe a really useful one, and I don't think this isn't to say that those that are more intrinsically motivated are faced with some sort of more tangible sort of zero-sum award. That isn't it. But when you've got that kid who's getting dragged out of the car, see if the very fact that you can give them the opportunity to do something that's separate from the game, if you want to make it as separate as you feel it needs to be, if you do that and that keeps them coming back, or that keeps them
Yeah,
engaged in the session, will you have the conversations with them, will you have the praise that you're giving them that makes them go, I'm actually quite good at this, I'm quite good at something, or at least I'm good at this activity, I could
yeah,
become good at football, or I'm actually
yeah,
helping my team because now my team's winning. I'm now becoming pals with the people that are here. I really
yeah,
like coming here. You're using the carrot as a means, as a meantime thing. And
yeah,
it can also be, it seems, David, like it can also be used as a long-term mastery focused tool, because that is kind of seems what it tends to
yeah.
be. And I just think that's a really, it's a really potent example, and I just was not, I'm not meaning to hijack. I think it's a really potent example where we have to be mindful where there's evidence in academic circles that need to be met with professional judgment, and you have to understand the
Mm-hmm.
realities of coaching before you sometimes unconsciously just assimilate what you read, because this is where there's complexity in athlete-centered coaching, autonomy supportive coaching. We misunderstand it
Yeah.
sometimes. We can misunderstand the use of rewards sometimes, and this is an example of that, I think.
Yeah.
'Cause I just think it's brilliant. I think it's real,
Yeah.
and that, yeah, it's just something that it's just more a comment than anything. But I think it's really important
No,
to get
brilliant.
that
And yeah,
across.
you're right, because those children, for a lot of children, playing football with their peers, particularly at school, sometimes at a club, fills them with anxiety because they don't feel good enough to help the team. And actually, when they touch the ball, they might hinder the team, and then they get a negative comment. And we want to take away all of that. You can help your team by trying your best. You might shoot and not score, but the coach is going to praise your confidence and your effort to shoot. And yeah, we do need to be mindful of that praise, because intrinsic motivation is really, really important. And that's why so many scoreboards, it's like, oh, well done, Mark. That was good scanning. Come to the scoreboard. But then they need to achieve a point at the scoreboard. There's very few where we just give them something. They need to
Mm,
throw a ball in a hoop, or flip a ball into a trash can, or flip a cone over by slamming a ball on top of it. So when they fail at the scoreboard and don't get the bonus point, the intrinsic motivation comes from, oh, well, I want to do something good and get back over there and try and do it again. We're not handing out too many rewards, apart from the ones for the really, really young ones, because we're trying to make them feel competent, so they lean into the sport a little bit more. But yeah,
yeah.
there's loads of scoreboards on the website. The fun thing for coaches is coming up with their own scoreboards once they're confident with the methodology, which is small sided games with a fun challenge at the side. And then yeah, probably a podcast for another day. But we do so much work around autonomy, so children creating the rewards and children sending their peers to the scoreboard is a big bit of work that we do. Particularly in schools and things like that. That kind of leadership model around. Well, why are the coaches only ones that can highlight the good and the bad? Mark can be the captain of one team, David can be the captain of the other team, and you can actually send opposition players to the scoreboard, because on Saturday we're all going to be one team, right? Or we're all one class. So
Mm,
there's a big bit around the autonomy that we've touched on. There's a big bit in the club program when I come out and work quite closely with some of our partner clubs on like values and wider cultures. It's
mm,
great to use the scoreboard to praise passing, dribbling, and shooting, but we want to be praising teamwork, resilience, transferable skills. So when I go out to a club and they've got their values on the badge or in the changing rooms around like respect and resilience and teamwork. And then I say to the children, what are the values? Like none of them can tell me, right? So Scoreboard Soccer gives clubs and organizations a really practical way that throughout that club, they're all talking about the same values: teamwork,
mm.
resilience, effort, whatever they might be. This gives you a practical way to be talking about them, praising them, and building those good habits across the whole club.
Yeah, and what's amazing about that? It's like these are all the outcomes that every coach would want. You've spoke about that in terms of the
Yeah,
culture, and it can be achieved through the scoreboard. It can be achieved through keeping score in some way. But again, it's about, and I say, a reason I say this, it's helping me connect thoughts that I've spoke previously to Cesar Torres, who speaks a little bit about the villainisation of competition in youth sport, and that's why the upcoming episodes as well. But he, similar to yourself, I think, treats competition as a training modality like any other
yeah,
modality, and it's not competition that's at fault. It's how we use it and why we're using it and the way we're using it.
exactly.
And I think so. I think this is yet another approach that is sort of making us think differently about that. And that's, for me, is a really healthy thing. And I think it's because we need to use all the tools we can do. And I think storekeeping is another tool that we have. And this is showing the way that we can use it correctly. So it stops being about the experience and anecdotal evidence that we often use, and it becomes more about our use of a strategy. I'm wondering, David, to help us sort of round off, is this just for football? This doesn't seem like, to me,
Yeah.
this is just for football. I could imagine a rugby coach doing this. I could actually imagine a golf
Yeah.
teacher doing this. This doesn't seem to me like something that's just for team sports. Could you see this? I could see this being used in loads of different sports. There's people that will be listening that come from different sports. What do you
Yeah.
say about that, or what are you thinking there?
Yeah, we have partner organisations in rugby, GA over in Ireland, so the kind of Gaelic games,
Ah, good.
and ice hockey is a really popular one. We have a partner association in America. Essentially, any invasion sports you can add a scoreboard to, for healthy competition and to increase motivation and all the benefits we spoke about. But yeah, when I first started doing scoreboard soccer games, football being my sport, I didn't imagine some of the areas that would really lead into. I was very much a football coaching club competition kind of coach. So the fact that it's been used in schools, I think, is brilliant. Teachers giving that feedback that we love that we can tie it into classroom learning. So I've done a teacher did a scoreboard in a school where they were working on the dinosaurs in the classroom. So the scoreboard was pictures of dinosaurs and names of dinosaurs. So when
Ah,
the children
brilliant.
got sent over, they had to match them up for a point. Brilliant. I got tagged in a really cool walking football video where they added a scoreboard, and the coach sent me a really nice thing to say, it was elderly gentlemen that were playing walking football. These men, they just play football every week. When they were younger at training, they do shooting drills and passing drills, and they miss a bit of that. They show up and play every week, and it was getting a bit semi. So they added a kind of scoreboard at the side, one of the ones off the website, and they loved it. Starting to engage with kind of additional support needs. Some of those groups, it seems to be there can be a real big disparity in motivation and mixed ability levels when they're playing sport. So the scoreboard can kind of do some stuff within that space as well.
Mm,
So yeah, absolutely. Any invasion sports, it can kind of be added. And non-invasion sports make for great scoreboards. I think we'd spoke kind of off air around the boccia mat I've got. When I bring boccia along as a
mm.
scoreboard, brilliant. I had a coach after I did a club presentation around Scoreboard Soccer, tagged me in something on Twitter. He had a kind of little putting mat, that you pass the ball up and it goes in the hole
Ah,
and it
yeah.
comes back down.
Yep.
He brought his putter and his putting mat to the side of his small-sided games, and the kids could come over and try and do a bit of golf as the scoreboard. So there's huge potential, and hopefully your coaches listening will try maybe a tried and tested scoreboard from scoreboardsoccer.com, and maybe think of some of their own, and tag me in it so I can see their ideas as well.
Yeah. So maybe that's a nice sort of segue towards how can people get in contact with you, David, and also like how can people reach out for the services that you offer or some of the guidance that you're able to give? So you mentioned the
Yeah.
tell and the workshops. Tell us people what to
Yeah,
connect
so
with you.
the website is just scoreboardsoccer.com. If you visit scoreboardsoccer.com in your phone, by a couple of clicks, you can download it into an app onto your phone, which is quite popular. My email is just david@scoreboardsoccer.com. If you want me to come out and do some work with the coaches at your club, or you're interested in the club program where, I come out in person and we do some stuff on the pitch with the players and the coaches. So yeah, just yeah, by email, I'm happy to chat. I wrote a book on this concept a number of years ago, so you can buy the Scoreboard Soccer book, kind of a much kind of deeper dive into how Scoreboard Soccer would look within the kind of full session, what you would do maybe leading up to a Scoreboard Soccer game, and how you would bring all the learning to life from that session through the Scoreboard Soccer methodology. So no, I just really appreciate the platform, Mark, to speak about something that I'm not only hugely passionate about, I'm hugely passionate about because I've seen the benefit. I've seen children kind of fall in love with football. I've seen them work really, really hard. I've seen the smiles on their faces, and the groups that I've done it with over any period of time. You see that development as well. You really do see, because they're investing so much effort into the sessions, their skill level really can come on. So no, thanks for having me on, Mark. It's been brilliant.
No, thanks so much, David. I think what you've given us is something that people can access. It's something that's not a scary, overcomplicated system.
Hmm.
Because I think a lot of the times we hear about the new best way of doing things, and you need to do a master's degree and understand half of the stuff that you're getting told, and I don't think that's useful. Certainly not for people who are just starting out, or even people that have been around for a while and they want to try something different, or they want to enhance what they already do. It's really accessible. I think the framework itself is accessible. It's really based in not just evidence, but real understanding of evidence. And we've spoke already about the nuance of not taking things too deliberately or not too
Yeah.
literal at certain points. And again, it's just another example of understanding all the things that make up coaching, and understanding, even if you want to come back to skill acquisition, even if you want to look at coaching in that more classical way, there is more to a player
Yep.
than their execution. And if you want good execution, you need to connect with the player. If you want to
Yep.
work with the player, you need to think more about yourself. How are you at doing things? Is it your approach to things that is the issue? How can you get better at approaching things? This offers one way of doing that. So no, I've really loved it. It's really practical. It's, a bit. It's got a bit of me in that. I think I like that kind of thing. So, thanks once more, David. Thank you, everyone that's been listening. Hopefully, that conversation has been as helpful for you as it certainly has been for me. So I will see you next time.